rose. But I think we'll have that in our auction this coming year. The California Coastal Rose Society has been putting on auctions for 25 years. This is our 25th, and it'll be this fall, and we'll be working with Linda to help have a school for teaching people how to become judges, right? A judges school at the same time, and it'll be in Oceanside. And because it's the 25th, we're going to be offering 300 roses, 300 varieties of roses, and I believe that about 80% will not be available anywhere else in the U.S. So get on with that. When I was in Belgium, Rosa Belgica was the 15th International Heritage Rose Conference. And I had planned on reading that, but I'll just let you guys read what you want. The top part of that talks about when the World Federation of Roses was first formed, and those are some of their objectives. And the U.S. was one of the founding members of that Rose Society, which was founded in New Zealand. And I think because of that, New Zealand and Australia have a little more say than you would think they would. The current president is from Australia. It was held at the, Sue Streeper is going to correct me if I'm wrong, at the Palais des Académies. Is that close to? Which was in Belgium, and it was really cool to be around all these old buildings, and it added an air of significance to what was going on. This was the entrance to where the seminars were held, and there were attendees from 25 different countries, which just blew my mind that people all over the world were just as interested in roses as I was. I have this rose in my yard. It's called Yuki's Dream, and it was discovered by Dr. Yuki Miganagi in Sichuan province in China. And it's a China rose, very vigorous. But what was cool was I got to meet Yuki. That's Dr. Mikanagi there. And I was able to, during the conference, see that there is still a separation between rose exhibitors and heritage rose people. And Charles Quest-Ritten, I think his name is. He was the person who put together the Royal Horticultural Encyclopedia of Roses. He pointed out what the two factions of rose growers say about each other, which I thought was kind of cool. He said the one group says old roses are boring, they only flower once, those are the exhibitors. And the heritage rose growers say modern roses are vulgar, and so are the people who grow them. But I think if we work together, you don't have to be in one group. You can actually be in both. That's Charles over there. Guess I'm not used to using the pointer. There was Sylvia Fineschi was there from the Fineschi Rose Garden in Caviglia, Italy. And the Fineschi Garden is the world's largest private rose garden. They have hundreds of roses that they may have the only one left in the world of that particular rose. One of the roses that was at Fineschi was Princess Marie Dagmar, which is an old hybrid tea. And John and Becky Hook in France were looking for this rose. And they saw that Fineschi had one, so John made a trip from France to Italy, got a cutting, and he mentioned that the last time he was there, the rose was gone. So had John not gotten that rose, it would be extinct. And I have it in my yard now, and we've offered it in the auction. So those are the kinds of things that we just hope we can keep going. That's Princess Marie Dagmar on the right, and the rose on the left. This really made me proud, but here I am with growers of roses from all over the world, and one of the slides that gets put up is about the California Coastal Rose Society and our auction and our attempt to preserve roses. So you kind of feel like you've done something that somebody's noticed. When you're saving old roses, they brought up the 3-3-30 rule. And what that basically says is a rose is in danger of extinction if it's not grown in 3 public gardens, grown by 3 wholesale growers, and it's in 30 private gardens. So any rose that doesn't fit those requirements is considered endangered. I was really pleased to see that Sweden has a germplasm bank that they're holding for roses that may go extinct. They can be brought back like dinosaurs, I guess. But it's nice to know that the genes are still there. This shocked me, is that someone would give a presentation about roses in Bhutan. I'm not even sure I knew where Bhutan was before I went there, let alone that they grew roses. All the way on the left is a former president of the American Rose Society, that's Jolene Adams, she attended. And all the way to the right is Robert Ardini, who is the North American Vice President of the World Federation of Roses, and who Ruth is working closely with to bring the convention to San Diego in 2017. 2027. Feel free to correct me anytime. Every morning we had lectures, and then in the afternoon we visited gardens. The Misa Botanic Garden in Belgium, most of the botanical gardens there are based around castles. So this one in Belgium was known for all kinds of plants, being a botanic garden, but had an emphasis on roses. And they had the works of, in some of the collection of Francois Crépin. And in the mid-1800s, Crépin wrote, which I believe was the first monologue on roses. So they had some of his original works there, and they had some of his drawings. But these were the kinds of roses that you saw as you just walked through. That is a cross between Kifsgate and Violet Hood. And anyone who doesn't know the Kifsgate rose, if you saw the original one in England, I think you'd be just as shocked as I was. The rose covered almost an acre and had basketball-sized clusters of blooms, and I would say thousands of those clusters all over the plant when it was in bloom. So it's a large plant, but this Dentelle de Bruxelles was not that big.
Does it bloom more than once?
What's that?
Does it bloom more than once?
That one I'm not sure. That may be more than a once bloomer, but the Kifsgate is a once bloomer, and the Violet Hood is a repeat bloomer, but it's mainly a once bloomer, and then kind of, puts out some blooms later on. That's Anita Clevenger, who was on the trip, and Anita used to be in charge of the the Sacramento Cemetery Rose Garden, which was known worldwide for its collection of roses and found roses, until the Sacramento City Council decided that all the roses should be cut back or pulled out.
Why?
Because they were the city council. Why else? Their excuse was they wanted to return the cemetery back to its original form, but that made no sense because Anita was able to find original photographs from the 1800s that showed roses were planted on the graves. So my garden is a repository for all the roses that were lost in the cemetery, and I'm hoping to get the best ones in the fall auction that we're going to have. But look at that rose behind her. That's a species rose that I don't believe exists in the U.S. Rosa bella, and bella, you know, is Latin for beautiful. That's it certainly was, and it's one I would like to get hold of. I should mention that the Mesa Botanic Garden is known for its collection of species roses, and many of the species roses I had never seen before. Rosa henryi is another one that you know, it looks like a single white rose, but when it's in bloom in mass like that, it's spectacular. This garden I can never pronounce, Les Roleux. I think that in Belgian they put a little X sound on the end of it, and the French don't. But that's also an international trial garden. So the roses that are here are part of the trials. And as we walked down, we got to see the scores of some of them, some of the new roses that would be released. And they introduced a new rose that year. Some of you are probably aware that in Europe, when they introduce a new rose, they baptize it. So this rose was named after Prince Vauthier de Ligne, and he was the Prince of Belgium, who had just died, and he was an ardent rose lover. So I believe it was Louis Lenz, the Lenz nursery, came out with this rose and named it after him. When you baptize the rose, you usually have the bush there and you pour champagne over it. For some reason, they thought Belgian beer would be more appropriate, so they did not use the champagne. But this is the rose on the left, and on the right is the Princess of Belgium and her son, Prince Philippe, I think. Coloma was really interesting to me because it was more of a formal rose garden, but when you got into the collections, the roses were all grown by country that they had come from. So rather than a collection of hybrid teas, it would be roses from Italy, then roses from Spain. And it was really interesting to see that. These were the walkways as you walked through to where the collection was, but you see some of these are kind of formal gardens. Rosita Miscione on the left is one of Barney's roses out of Italy, and whenever I get a chance to collect Italian roses, I do so because it's illegal to bring, ever since Mussolini, it's been illegal to bring roses from Italy into the US. And they've got just spectacular roses, so whenever I can get one, I want to get it. And the rose on the right is one of Pedro Dot, who is kind of the father of roses in Spain. It was named after Cole Porter's wife, Linda, and I don't think it exists in the US anymore, so it's one that I'm trying to get over here. The route there is, I drove with Steve Donatoff and Greg Lowry from Brussels to Sangerhausen in East Germany, and the yellow dots up there are areas that we stopped in, which I'll show you the gardens we saw there. First one was Dortmund. Ping Lim had told me that he thought Dortmund was the most beautiful garden he'd ever seen, and it would be hard for me to argue with that. Their roses were not in beds by themselves, but they were mixed with perennials and shrubs and all different kinds of, which, by the way, I was talking to Rita Perwich earlier. I think it's because they don't spray either, that having that mixture gets a lot of beneficial insects in there and keeps the insect populations down. Greg and Steve were lamenting the fact that there was going to be a plant sale, and they thought there'd be so many people there they wouldn't be able to enjoy the roses. To me, it was a benefit that there was a plant sale because there were all kinds of things to look at. And it was apart from where the roses were, so Steve and Greg got to go look at the roses first, and I went through to look at what they were selling. These are dahlias. Every plant that they sold at that sale was perfect, like it came out of a machine that way. This is another Barney rose out of Italy, Scent of a Woman, and the lavender that's there on the right is in the rose beds, and it looked a lot more delicate than, I mean, it was a hardy plant, but it didn't look as rough as some of the lavenders we have here. It was a little more graceful and would blow in the wind, and it was a perfect addition to the gardens. You can see what the gardens looked like with the perennials in there. I was surprised through all of Germany to see so many climbers. When we grow climbing roses, at least when I do, I always think, I like this rose, but where would I put it? And all they did was put up a stake, and they had these roses everywhere. When we get to Sanger House, and you'll see they have thousands of climbers, all on poles. A bed might have 200 climbers in it. The rose on the left, Bulata, I have in my garden, and you can find it in the U.S., but it's one of the roses that was in Ray Duté's Book of Roses. You know, Ray Duté was the painter that painted all of the Empress Josephine's roses at Malmaison in France. And there was, if you go through that book, you'll see there's a whole group of roses grown for their leaves. There was a lettuce-leafed rose, which is Bulata right here. There was a peach-leafed rose. There was a celery-leafed rose, a hemp-leafed rose. They're all extinct except for Bulata. And the nice thing about Bulata is it's got huge fat leaves, and they kind of look like lettuce, really crinkly. It's a rose, centifolia rose. Centifolia means 100 petals. And it was one of the roses that was originally referred to as cabbage roses. We went from Dortmund to the city of Kassel, and one of the people that was at the at Rosa Belgica was the curator of the garden here, and he told us we had to go here. He was going on the post tour, so he couldn't be there to show us around, but he hooked us up with some people who lived in the area, who only spoke German, but supposedly her husband spoke English, and he was going to translate. As it turns out, Steve Dunatoff, who was with us, spoke more German and English than either one of them put together. That was the woman who hosted us while we were there. And it's amazing because her garden was a city in a city on a plot that was probably, I don't even think it was a quarter of an acre. And she had like a 200-year-old shade tree on the property. She had lily ponds. She had roses growing everywhere. It was like being in an enchanted wonderland. And she knew a lot about roses. So going up to the park where the roses were, it was the Wilhelm Schur Palace in Kassel. And the person who owned that, from where the castle was that I just showed you, all the way up a huge mountain, at the top was a statue of Hercules. And as you walk through the garden, you get to see the roses. None of them are in formal beds, but you get to see them growing in the wild, and some you don't even think are roses. They had a lot of interesting things. I had never seen a heliotrope as a standard, but I thought that was kind of a cool thing to do. And then they did some mosaic gardens, which was interesting. Then this was the beginning of the rose garden as you walked into it, and you can see the roses are just in the natural landscape. I didn't even realize that was a rose at first. I thought it might be a magnolia or something, but I thought it was interesting. The only difficult part about walking through here was trying to identify the roses, because that's how they're labeled. And I asked the woman who was showing us around, why do they just have numbers? The book on the left tells you the name of the rose that's that particular number. And she said, because of the I think they have 1,500 roses there. She said, at the end of the summer, we would have no tags left at all if it had the name. She said, people even steal the tags with the numbers, but she said with the name, they disappear immediately. I was also pleased to see that a lot of the gardens in Germany mislabel their roses, just like we do over here. So don't feel bad if you have a rose mislabeled in your yard. Then we went to Lauterbach on the way to, before we went to Sangerhausen, and we met with Rudolf Bergman and his wife Veronica, who hosted us. This is their backyard. The thing they were most proud of was their American patio. When they built the house, or remodeled the house, Veronica told Rudolph, I want a covered patio like they have in the United States. So they entertain a lot on their patio. But this is their backyard. It's a small backyard, and Rudolph, who is walking away from Veronica there, is one of the leading experts on roses in Germany. And there was nothing in their backyard when they bought the home. It was just woods. So they've converted it over to his rose collection, which I think he has an acre there. Maybe it's a half acre. It certainly wasn't enough for all the roses he wanted to grow. That's the patio again. That was a rose drink. What it's they called it Prosecco instead of Prosecco. I guess it's because it wasn't alcoholic, but it really tasted good. So back to Rudolph. He just outside of town bought 3 acres so that he could have a garden over there for the rest of his roses. This is still at their house. Before we leave Lauterbach, they took us to a farm that had been a working farm in Germany for 400 years, and in the same family for 400 years. And the woman who owned it was Anina Böhm-Kruzina, and she wrote this book called Rosenzuchterinnen, which means female rose breeders. So it's all about women rose breeders, and Chula Vista's own Dee Bennett is in here. Of course, it's in German, but you can read it with your iPhone if you put it on Translate. But it was really interesting to see a garden that, the garden wasn't there, rose garden wasn't there for 400 years, but you could see it had been there for a while. That's Anita, second from the left. And this is her potting shed. And then this is her rose garden. And she had a lot of roses there from women rose breeders that you never see anywhere else. And one that really, I guess it's just the story that intrigued me, but this rose was called In Memoriam, and that was by, I always forget her name, that was by Andrea Brown. And Andrea Brown dedicated this rose. It's called In Memoriam because it's dedicated to the victims of the euthanasia program that the Nazis had at the Psychiatric Institute in Germany under Hitler. And the reason she named it in honor of them was because she has had some mental problems and would have been one of the women that the Nazis, one of the people the Nazis euthanized had she been living there at the time. Anyway, Anita was nice enough to let us borrow some cuttings, and we brought those back, and Greg Lowry is just amazing at rooting cuttings, and everything we brought back rooted. So I'm hoping to have this rose in the fall auction. This again is her garden. Now, this is the garden that Rudolph, the extra garden that Rudolph put up in Lauterbach. And he's mainly interested in old garden roses, and he really likes telling people where they're wrong about old garden roses. He considers himself an expert, and he may be. But these were the roses that were growing in that area. He's 80 years old and a vegetarian. He's never had a taste of meat in his life. So he also grows some heirloom tomatoes on this property. Some of you may be familiar with the old garden rose Jacques Cartier. Which is a pink rose, and this is a white version of it, which I had never seen. And Greg was able to root some cuttings of this, so I don't have one yet, but should have one soon, and I'd like to get that spread throughout California gardens. Whoops, I thought I deleted that. Not going to go into that story. It's an amazing story, but some of you will start walking out. When we got to Sangerhausen, Sangerhausen is in East Germany, and I know a lot of you know all about it, but it was during the Cold War. There was no trade between the Western world and the Soviet countries, especially in roses. So Sangerhausen, which is the world's largest rose garden now, has 80,000 roses. But Sangerhausen couldn't get any of the new roses. All the breeding that was going on in France and in the US, they didn't get any of those roses. So they kept they kept propagating the roses they had to keep them going. And it's not an easy feat in Sangerhausen because it's too cold to grow hybrid teas there in Floribundas, and they have thousands of them. But the reason they have thousands is they dig every plant up every winter and put it in cold storage, and then they replant them in the spring. So almost all the hybrid teas we looked at were about knee-high, but it was really interesting to see what they had. So when the Berlin Wall came down, they found that roses that the rest of the world thought were extinct were happy and alive over in Sangerhausen. As you walk through the town, you see things like this. This is just a building on a street, and that's a quote from a German poet. Wenn du eine Rosen schießt, sag something. Any Germans here can probably do a much better job than I, but basically it means that when you see a rose, it's me sending greetings to you, or it's saying hello to you. That type of sentiment, anyway. This is Hella Bruma, and Hella was the old, or the past, I should say, because we're all getting to be old. But she was the past curator of Sangerhausen, and her and Eilika Wemmer, sitting next to her, had just written this book on bourbon roses, and she was a wealth of knowledge. But her and Rudolph always butted heads. Rudolph insisted that Hella was doing things wrong, and she had mislabeled roses. And anyway, you don't want to talk to them together. But I met her in the garden, and she was very nice. She mainly speaks German, but she gave a presentation at Rosa Belgica. And the nice thing about Rosa Belgica is that the official language of the World Federation of Roses is English. She doesn't speak much English, but her and Eilika gave a presentation. I had no idea what they were talking about through the whole talk. But seeing her in the garden, I started asking her questions, and she put her hand up and she said, "I understand you when you talk slowly." And I said, "Oh, I understand you when you speak English." But we did get to communicate a lot, and she's a wonderful person. And there's I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Climbing Rose hot chocolate. I'm sorry, that's not the name of it. It's called Chocolate Sundae. And it's a dark brown climber. And I put that on a post in my yard, and on the other side of the post, I have the Climbing Rose Hella, which is white. So I have like black and white next to each other. I'm really excited to see them bloom this year. Oops. Okay, this is the Sangerhausen Rose Garden. This was on my bucket list for many years. I always hoped I would get to visit Sangerhausen. And when you build up something in your mind, you know that how great it's going to be. Oftentimes you're disappointed when you get there. And when I got to Sangerhausen, not only was I not disappointed, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. So these are some of the gardens. They also have formal rose gardens with 80,000. They've got to do something with them.
John, what month are you?
This was June, beginning of June. Those are the formal rose gardens at Sangerhausen. But you can see, as Greg's walking through there, these aren't even the climbing rose areas, but look at how many climbers they have. They just put them up on pillars. And I just did not cease to amaze me. And since I got back from Sangerhausen, I've now planted 30 climbing roses, and I've got about a dozen more ready to go.
On those towers, it's still the laterals that are blooming, right?
Yeah.
Are they just wrapping them around the towers?
They're clipping them, and then if they get, rather than letting the lateral grow after the bloom comes, they clip it back. So the new stem that comes out isn't that long. It depends on the rose. The ramblers, they do wrap around, but the repeat bloomers, they try to train up that way. They grow them as pillars rather than climbers. This is Seizo Suzuki's Rose Ferdy, which is a once bloomer, and even though I have a collection of Seizo Suzuki roses, who is Japan's greatest rose breeder, I never planted Ferdy because it's a once bloomer, and I thought, you know, how impressive can it be? But when I saw it there in full bloom, it was something to look at. There you can see beds of, on the left, those are just beds of climbers. It's impossible to do it in one day, but we had 2 days there, and even in 2 days we couldn't do it. I collect polyantha roses, and we found, I was looking for different polyanthus there, and I didn't find any the first day. The second day, Steve Denitoff came and he said, I found a treasure trove of polyanthus. There were hundreds of polyanthus that I had never heard of. These, wow, I can't believe I did that. You know what? I think either I saved it wrong. That's all right, don't worry about it. I'd gone through before I came over and I changed some of the things, and apparently I didn't do a good job of saving it. But I now have a working relationship with Zangerhausen, and you can imagine if you're digging up roses every year, overwintering them, you're going to lose some. So these varieties were varieties that they had lost. And they found out that I had them, and they asked if I could send them back. So there were two others I had put on there, Angelus Mateu. One of Pedro Dodd's roses was one, and then another one was Arnold, which Anita Clevenger had found that originally came from the Arnold Arboretum. But that and then these other four roses were roses that they lost, and we were able to return to them. And in return, they send me cuttings of roses that I asked for. And hopefully in the upcoming auction, we will have, I think we should have maybe 6 roses that until this last year did not exist in the United States. Some are old roses. So we'll put those up for auction, and it's just, our auction's just a neat place to get some old roses. It's gonna be very expensive to set up the auction in October, so on Mother's Day weekend, we are gonna have an online auction only, and we will mail roses all over the country, or if you want to come to my house in Fallbrook and pick them up, you can. Do you have a rose show that weekend? The previous one? Yeah. Anyway, you don't have to be there. You just go online to ccrsauction.com, and the rose variety should be up there in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and you can see what we're going to offer. And then 2 weeks before Mother's Day weekend, you can start placing bids. So it'll be the purpose of that auction is we'll have about 100 roses. The purpose is going to be to raise money so we can afford the auction in the fall, in the rose show in the fall. So anyway, there's some exciting things that are going on. We're going to continue to work with both old garden rose collectors and people trying to save found roses, and rose exhibitors. In the fall auction, we'll have probably 15 to 20 florist roses, which are all newer, and they've all been tested in the ground here in California. So I'm just shocked at how well they do. So anyway, I think that was the last slide.